It's my pleasure to introduce John Podesta. Many of you are familiar with John because he's certainly been with us over the past couple years, often in the role of questioner on the stage. So we're going to turn the tables on him today, and the secretary will be acting as the moderator. But John Podesta is currently serving as counselor to the president, where his duties include overseeing climate change and energy policy. He's the former chair of the Center for American Progress and served as White House Chief of Staff to President Bill Clinton. John has been a key supporter of ARPA-E, and it's been my pleasure to work with him over the past couple years. It's my pleasure now to welcome back to the stage Secretary Ernie Moniz and John Podesta.
Well, I have the pleasure to be on this stage for a second time today with a good friend and a chance to expose, I think, some important issues for this group and for all of us. John's biography, I should say, was somewhat summarized just now by Cheryl, but it failed to mention that we thought the pinnacle of John's career was his service on the Secretary of Energy Advisory Board for the first 7 months of my tenure, but he appeared to think that counselor to the president was somehow an upgrade. So, what we're going to do is I'm going to be basically trying to pose some questions with John and maybe pitch in a few remarks here and there, but fundamentally have John's perspective, particularly from his new position, obviously, as counselor to the president. In fact, let's just start by asking John, talk about your trek back into the government role.
Okay. Well, you know, I'd done the transition for President Obama, but at that time, I was running the Center for American Progress. I didn't think I'd do another tour in government. I thought I was with President Clinton right up to the end as his chief of staff and thought I was kind of done. But around Thanksgiving, the president, his chief of staff, asked me to return to the White House. And because I think we're in a somewhat different period of time right now. I want to say this delicately, but the Congress is being, shall we say, not fully productive. And so the president, I think,
so you mean semi-productive?
They're being semi-productive. But the president has set out quite an ambitious agenda, particularly in the climate and energy space, to do things that will move the country forward towards a future of more energy security, cleaner energy future, reduction of CO2 emissions. And he did that in the form of a climate action plan, which maybe we can talk a little bit about, Ernie. And he asked me to come back and do a number of different things. I am serving as a counselor, so I have a very broad portfolio, but one of the things he wanted me to do was to ensure that we actually delivered that climate action plan on time and with its full potential. So prior to my arrival there, the authority to move forward was distributed between the Domestic Policy Council, the Council on Environmental Quality, the National Security Council staff, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So I have been charged with and am trying to pull together all the elements of both the White House structures, but also working with you and the other key cabinet secretaries to ensure that we not only, as I said, deliver on the climate action plan, but can even up the ambition that as we learn more and move forward with greater energy and greater potential towards changing our energy base.
And I must say, viewing it from where we sit, like halfway between the White House and the Congress, I think, I say John's presence really has brought the kind of focus that you describe as being part of the role. And so that's quite.
I had also
quite
handed the
appreciated.
reins of the center to my successor, Neera Tandon, who's doing a great job over there. We've obviously built out a very substantial energy and climate program there. Carol Browner helps lead that effort. But so it was a good time. I had some space. My wife didn't say, "Are you kidding me?" And so I'm back there for a year to try to ensure that we create the right structures to, in particular, to move this agenda forward.
Why don't you talk a little bit more about the Climate Action Plan? And you said you came in kind of looking at the lay of the land.
Right.
What's your scorecard? How do you see this evolving?
Well, I think it was an ambitious plan. It was put together last spring and announced last summer that does a number of things. It involves virtually every agency of the government, but there are some principal efforts to both reduce overall emissions and spur forward the clean energy investments that you've been so involved with, and ARPA-E is so important to. Perhaps the centerpiece is the power plant rule that's being worked at the Environmental Protection Agency right now, which will change the CO2 emission profile of our existing fleet of power plants. That the president has directed that a draft of that rule be issued for comment in June, and I think that Gina McCarthy is out around the country talking to utilities, talking to regulators, talking to governors. We just had virtually all the nation's governors in. We spent a good deal of time on the questions of energy and climate in those meetings to prepare the proposed rule that will be tabled in June. And then we're on an ambitious schedule under the Clean Air Act to finalize that rule and to get states working on plans to reduce their emissions. And I think that as a good deal of attention is focused on that, but there are many other elements of the plan, including double the amount of renewables that we have on public lands. I think that's been a big success for the administration. The Department of Interior just licensed the 50th major renewable project. The last panel probably talked about Ivanpah. Where you were just out there. But there's the ability to move big renewable energy, both on solar and wind, is available on the public lands, and whether that's offshore wind or solar power on out west, geothermal, there's a substantial effort to get that done. There's we have tools available to us on the procurement side. The Department of Defense has been extremely active in trying to improve the efficiency and invest in future technologies and in both biofuels and in more renewables on federal installations. That is true of the whole built space that the federal government occupies. As I think you know and I know, the federal enterprise itself is the biggest organization in the world. There are 2 million employees. That means that's a lot of power, a lot of real estate. The Department of Defense, as a single entity, is the largest energy user in the world, but the federal government is a substantial user of energy, so that we can, just on the procurement side itself, I think we can make a lot of change happen. Then there are a number of other elements, and one that I guess I would focus on, Ernie, maybe that this crowd has been somewhat less focused on, is the big commitment that the president made to increase resilience, not just in the energy sector, but across the board as a result of the effects of climate change that we're beginning to feel. And that, I think, was a topic that really occupied a lot of the discussion in the White House over the last couple of days with the president and the governors. We had a meeting with Western governors yesterday in the Situation Room, taking a look at the current state of the drought in the West, the need to conserve more water, the need to build more resilient infrastructure across the board, and the effects of the drought in California, I think, have been particularly noted in the press. The president was out there recently with Governor Brown But I think that's been an area which has received somewhat less attention amongst people who are concerned about, particularly about climate change in the past. But it's become, I think, a topic of how we anticipate what climate changes are likely to do to our infrastructure, and what we need to do to react, the kind of investments we need to make to ensure that our economy continues to thrive, and that the risk to the economy and to livelihoods is mitigated. And that brings me to one of the, I won't go through the whole climate action plan, but one of the last very important elements, which is the quadrennial energy review, which of course the Department of Energy is the secretariat for. And we're well underway to scope an exercise looking at transportation, distribution, and storage of energy infrastructure from a variety of threats, including extreme weather and the effects of climate change, but also cybersecurity, the questions, as we saw in California, from individual acts of destruction that can be applied against our energy infrastructure. So I know you're well underway, and that's the first installment of what will be, I guess, an annual process that culminates in a 4-year plan to move our energy future forward. And I think that's just an extremely important element, because we need, and again, I think the work of ARPA-E in that context, in trying to think about the technologies that will be necessary to have a secure, resilient, and stable infrastructure in light of a number of different threats, will both improve the efficiency of that infrastructure, but also ensure that it's there when we need it.
I must say I'm personally also quite excited about this kind of more synthetic view of the whole spectrum of risks for the energy infrastructure that we're trying to work on together. Again, weather, cyber, physical interdependencies of infrastructure. So I think this will be a major contribution this year. You mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times that conversation gets broken up into a conversation about the electric grid, or about the transportation system, the pipeline system, et cetera. And I think your game plan to integrate all of that and to look where the crossover points are is really an essential part of looking to the strength and resiliency of the overall infrastructure in the country.
A few minutes ago, you mentioned the power plant rules as a centerpiece. Gina McCarthy has been pretty clear in stating that the rules to be proposed for existing plants will look quite different from those for new plants. Any elaboration on that?
Well, I think that I'm not going to jump the gun. We're still in a phase in which she's talking to a variety of stakeholders out and around the country. I just talked to her today. She's out in North Dakota later in the week. So I don't want to jump the gun on the way that will be presented, but I think that one of the essential elements of the section of the Clean Air Act, Section 111D, that she's operating under, is that it's implemented through state implementation plans. So I think she wants to find a way to ensure that we move on that rapidly, and to listen to stakeholders around the country. I think I would anticipate that the rules themselves will at least open up the opportunity for states and regions to think about their energy platform together, so that and again, we had some discussion about that, the interests of the West Coast governors to kind of come together and think about the West Coast as more of an integrated set of energy assets, obviously Reggie in the Northeast, and other states that may want to combine their energy platforms to get those reductions in the most efficient way, to look outside the fence, if you will, to ensure that we can incorporate ways of reducing demand as well as increasing supply of clean energy. I think all those will be in the mix, but until you know, it's her job to do the tough work and put that proposal together. And as I said, the technical team at EPA is obviously working very hard. She's working very hard to listen to stakeholders with the anticipation that that will be previewed through the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at the White House and sometime this spring, and then released for public comment in June of this year.
Change tracks a little bit. Clearly, as you said, the president has put forward a climate action plan. Maybe this, let's call it a 2020 horizon, trying to meet the goal of 17% reduction CO2. What would be your advice to the energy industry in terms of how they construct business plans looking even further out in the context of carbon uncertainty?
Well, it's interesting what you mean by carbon uncertainty. If you're talking about policy uncertainty.
Policy uncertainty, right.
I guess I understand what you're saying. If you're thinking about CO2's effect on the climate effect on
policy uncertainty.
And that effect on the economy, I think it's rather certain rather than uncertain. So I think I think energy industry has to plan for an eventuality where the externalities, the cost of CO2 pollution on the environment, but more particularly on the economy, is going to be built into the policy environment. That's going to be true, I think, in the U.S., and I think it's going to be true globally. So I think we're moving towards a cleaner energy future, and it's why the work of ARPA-E is really so critical. And you know, it was obviously the first dollars were invested as part of the Recovery Act that was passed in the beginning of 2009. I think it's already beginning to obviously pay dividends in terms of the research that has already been funded. But I wouldn't just, we're here at the ARPA-E conference. I think the overall effort of the department to really up and accelerate the innovation trajectory in the country is critical to meet those future needs for a cleaner energy platform with very dramatic reductions in CO2 into the atmosphere, at least. That is going to happen. The question is, when is it going to happen, and whether we're going to do it in a way that I think is efficient, cost-effective, and we can do it in a way that actually creates opportunity for the economy rather than greatly burdens the economy. I think one of the things about the United States, through all the above energy strategy that you've pursued and the president's pursued, is we've become an energy powerhouse again. And I think that's particularly true in the clean energy space. So the kinds of you know, at a moment where it looked like the Europeans were going to really accelerate in front of us, I think the U.S. has caught up both on the technology side and the deployment side. That's been the result. You know, I mentioned the Recovery Act, of the major investments that were included in that act, both in direct investment and in efficiency and deployment of renewable energy and other forms of clean energy. It's the result of the abundance and the ability to, through innovation, led by Department of Energy investments in an earlier period, to be able to extract natural gas and the ability to use that, and the ability to have the advantage that we see from the price of gas now in the U.S. to power manufacturing more broadly in the country. I think sometimes people think about this as only having an upside in the energy sector, if you will. But I think if you think about the advantages that the U.S. has now gained by lowering its imports of imported oil, by expanding the resource in both the oil and gas sector, by the doubling of the deployments of solar and wind, by seeing dramatic price reductions in those areas. I think that the United States has become a place where people want to invest, in part because of the secure nature of our energy supply, and quite frankly, the pricing of our energy supply here. So you were down with the president in Raleigh announcing this Advanced Manufacturing Institute and you're about to announce a new competition for a second one. The Department of Defense will announce this afternoon a couple of new initiatives on manufacturing. Those, I think, are built in part on the major commitments to innovation, R&D, but also, I think, the ability to have supplies of resources here that other countries just don't quite have the advantage for.
I mean, some, as you know, have expressed concerns about the natural gas abundance, in particular, crowding out other renewables or nuclear. Yeah. Any views?
Yeah, I think, look, I think you have to keep your eye on the present, and you have to look to the future. So it's that there's no question that the U.S. economy has benefited from the ability to have an abundant supply of gas. We're the largest gas producer in the world now. The price has been has meant that there's been more investment on the industrial side. You'll hear from manufacturers that they want to keep it that way when you talk to them about particularly about LNG exports. But I think you also have to keep your eye on the future, that we need to move to a more dramatic reduction of CO2 emissions in the decade post-2020 and the decades after that. And so policy has to be supple, I guess, enough to ensure that we're making the right investments in the newer technologies and new technologies that will ensure that we're continuing to deploy zero carbon solutions. You just were down in Georgia to, I think you did it in Georgia.
Yes, Georgia, last week.
To sign the loan guarantees on the 2 new nuclear plants. I think the last panel was discussing the extremely difficult economics of building out a lot of new nuclear in the U.S., particularly given the low price of natural gas. But I don't think that means we can pull back and walk away from investments, at least in the R&D sphere, and the potential for small modular reactors, et cetera. But the same thing is true on the renewable side. I think we have to have a balanced portfolio that's critical. We will put forward a permanent extension and refundable extension of the production tax credit for wind. And so we're going to have to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time, take advantage of the abundant supplies of gas right now in terms of building our economy, but invest in the technologies of the future that will result in a lower emissions profile. It's possible, hope springs eternal in the Secretary of Energy's heart, that we'll get technologies for carbon capture and sequestration or utilization that will produce the ability to produce different kinds of fossil fuels, including natural gas, where the CO2 profile can be reduced but through either utilization or sequestration. But at some point, we're going to have to move to a much lower CO2 energy base in this country. And I think we got to be practical about the pace in which we do it. Obviously, my job is to kind of try to accelerate that pace, but there's got to be some vision of how we can do that in a practical way that keeps the economy strong and moving forward.
You mentioned my trips to North Carolina, Southern California, Georgia. I'll add, in addition, Virginia, Mississippi, and Texas. It was an all-of-the-above tour. So we touched literally CCS, oil, gas, nuclear, renewables, and efficiency, and capacity building. But I would note, at the pattern of that, it was a southern tour in the winter, saving the northern tour for the summer. However, that was before, that planning was done maybe before polar vortex weirdness. And in fact, obviously there's a lot of complicated science here, but we had these disasters really in the South, in Atlanta, et cetera, and yet globally, January was the 4th warmest January in history in the world. So it's kind of this weird pattern, directly, indirectly associated with climate change. Why aren't we communicating more effectively with the public in terms of these risks?
Well, you know, I think we've gone through a period where there was quite a bit of pushback, a lot of money spent by the sort of climate denying community over the last few years. I think if I pay attention to public attitude, and the public attitude I think has swung back, and I think the reason for that, you know, the issue of climate change took on, like everything else in Washington, a sort of partisan cast to it over the last few years. I think that's at least from a public opinion perspective, I think that's beginning to change. And I say that advisedly. I'll maybe expand a little bit here. I think people sense that something's, you know, awry. You don't, the weird weather affects people's mentality about this. Mm-hmm. So you see the swing back to people understanding that climate change is happening, that it's affecting the natural environment, that they're seeing those changes take place, and particularly the extreme weather events. The President was out in, you know, as I mentioned, in Fresno with Governor Brown. This tremendous drought in California, that the likes of which, unless you know they get considerable precipitation in the next month or two, is likely to have never been seen since we've been keeping accurate records of precipitation in California in the 1890s. The drought drought conditions in the Colorado River Basin west, the increased intensity of storms. I mean, I think people are getting that there's something going on in the natural world. I think they do link that to climate change. They do understand that provides a threat to the future, risk to the economy, and a sense that we owe it to future generations to do something about it. What's, I think, still problematic with respect to convincing people to take the actions that are going to be necessary to take and to make good choices is what I would describe as the saliency of the issue. There's still a sense that we've got time, it's in the future, but I think even that's changing as well. If you ask people to, you know, put a list up, you know, still jobs, the economy, wages are at the top of that list. And I think that notwithstanding at least some of our attempts to convince people that opportunity on all those fronts, to put people to work, to see good jobs come back, to invest in those technologies, to make America that clean energy powerhouse I talked about, they still feel like the here and now, they're still stressed in the economy, and we can wait a little bit. But you know, my view, we can't really wait, and we have to make those investments now, and they will. The missing factor, I think, in the U.S. public's mind is what the risk to the economy from not changing our habits is going to be. And I think there are obviously efforts by the administration to convince them of that. I think really the focus that the President has placed on resiliency and not shying away from linking what the future of, you know, kind of difficult changes in weather patterns are going to mean to localized economies. You know, we took some criticism of his talking about climate resilience in the context of the California drought. But it's time to talk about those things, and it's time to talk with Western governors. We met with as I mentioned, we met with the Western governors, many of whom are conservative Republicans.
Right.
We had a good conversation about how are we going to engineer our systems so that people can thrive in communities that were really built with a very different set of weather patterns that had existed through the bulk of at least the 20th century, if not earlier. So I think we just got to get around to that conversation. We got to keep repeating it, and the president's committed to doing that, and to kind of educate the public about what the stakes of inaction are, what the very real stakes and the exposure that the economy has, and what the exposure that taxpayers have. You know, we spent $60 billion on trying to rebuild after Superstorm Sandy. The drought in California is going to be seen not just by farmers and ranchers and people at ground zero, but by people when they go shopping for produce in grocery stores across the country.
Right.
So I think we're going to really have to kind of accelerate that conversation and use the best scientific data, as I should always say in any one of these conversations. You might not be able, or it may take you a while to pin any particular extreme weather event on the effects of climate change. But there's no question that John Holdren, the head of our Office of Science and Technology Policy, did a good job of explaining to those Western governors why the effects of warmer weather, the less snow, more rain, less predictable runoff in the spring, more evaporation, not only from soil but from stored bodies of water, will accelerate the changes that we're seeing taking place in the Western United States, and we're going to have to adapt to that.
Right. I'd add another big one in the West, certainly, and that is the current and projected continued destruction of western forests,
right?
Beetles and this kind of thing.
Well, one of the things that's interesting about our budget that will be put out next week is a major commitment to changing the way that we're going to pay for suppression of forest fires, because it's just eating up the budgets of the agencies that are required to manage those forests as well. Right. So instead of spending, so we're thinking about a different way to do that, and there's $1 billion in that budget for investments in climate resilience.
John, I'm being told that we are stretching the time, but so I want to ask just 3 last questions.
All right.
With like
I'll be real
with
short.
as close to one-word answers as possible.
Great.
So now in this environment, I don't want to lead the witness, but
I just want to say, when I came out, Ernie said, "Talk like a professor. You can be long-winded."
That's right. But do you see roughly speaking, this is a caricature, but do you see the acceleration of the transition that you talk about technology-driven or policy-driven?
I think
a simple-minded question.
Look, I think we got to have a policy framework but ultimately, the real future of a different whole technology base is going to be technology-driven. But without the right policy framework, I don't think we'll get the right investments in that technology.
Okay, we have a debate to have offline.
Right.
Second, what do you see as the ultimate path and maybe timescale towards legislative action on climate?
That's a stumper.
Okay, we can move on to the last question.
I think what really needs to happen, we saw it happen in healthcare, and people are probably on different sides of the issue. But this has to be a joint debate, I think, in a presidential campaign, and I suspect it will be in 2016. We forget that in 2008, Senator McCain and Senator Obama didn't really disagree on climate change. They didn't hardly disagree on the solution. Both supported a cap-and-trade scheme, a little bit different in ambition.
Right.
So the intense pushback occurred sort of right after that campaign. But I think politics doesn't change in a country without a presidential campaign where the issues really join. I think that's likely to happen in 2016.
Okay. Last question. This is actually...
So 2017.
2017. We have an answer. Last question. Actually, this is John's 4th out of 5 ARPA-E summits. Observations on the evolution of ARPA-E, where it is, where it might go?
Sure. You know, when we first came out here, I was at the first one. You know, it was just a kind of, yeah, I think the best example is you go to the technology fair, and you got a lot of companies doing a lot of exciting things based on some support from the government, but attracting a lot of private capital in very innovative technologies. In the first one, it was all kind of a hope and a prayer, and a couple of companies who had gotten preliminary indications that they might get funded. So you've seen a tremendous arc of this moving from you know, an idea to implementation. And that's, I think, what's exciting about the work of ARPA-E and exciting about the work of the department.
And I'm going to lie and add one more question, and really infuriate the timekeepers, but because you triggered another question that I wanted to ask. You clearly have in mind to bring a new focus, an elevated focus, to clean energy finance.
Yeah.
Comments?
Well, I think that's the one part that's kind of left out of the climate action plan that was done last spring and last summer, which is without a lot more private capital investing in building out this newer, cleaner energy infrastructure and investment going to, you know, particularly to efficiency as well as to clean energy deployment. I don't think we're going to get far enough along. So there are obviously some authorities that exist at DOE that can be utilized. There's a lot of interest, and I just met with your deputy about interest in sovereign wealth funds investing in the U.S. as a good investment in the energy space and in the clean energy space. But I think we've got to find new tools that can incentivize, if you will, or work in partnership, in public-private partnership with the private sector, just to see more movement of private capital into this space. And so we're developing some ideas for that, and working with your team to see if we can, and working with HUD, trying to think about how you really apply that in the built space, both for distributed generation as well, but particularly for efficiency, so that we'll see more private capital flow into the sector.
Great. Well, we could be going on and on. I certainly have a lot more questions for John, but first, I just again want to repeat that I think John in his new role is really providing a major focus for us across the administration, and we're going to be working very, very closely with John and other colleagues in the administration. And let's thank him for his remarks.
Thank you, Ernest.